Afternoon. I think we're going to start now. My name is Jim Lucas. I am Global Strategy and Insights Director at SGK, also known as Shock. We will be talking today about how retailers are going about building their own brands now. And we've seen some very marked trends inside of that. Two things. One is that, unfortunately, for the acoustics of the building I'm in, you may hear some ambulances from along the way, but we'll try to minimize that. And they've asked me to show more of my face and less of the ceiling. I can't imagine that could be a good thing, but there you go. So we're going to start and see how we can go through this. And again, if you have questions, you can certainly just text them in here and we'll try to answer them, probably at the close, if you will. So just to start things off, one of the things that has started to occur in terms of what retailers are doing is that this increasingly distinction is being made between what I'll call private label and own brand, or sometimes called private brand. And I think the notion here is one of those things that kind of like you can probably know it when you see it, but it's harder to define. But maybe a couple of things that they are trying to achieve is they're sort of behaving and acting more like national brands. They've got marketing support and starting to see some of these things change. Also, they're focused on meeting the needs or wants of a specific shopper segment in a lot of cases. We're seeing that own brands are also starting to focus a lot on delivering value for the money or added value rather than just price or opening price point. And then finally, what we're starting to see is that they're playing a larger role in supporting a retailer's image. So own brands are starting to evolve, at least it seems, as a sort of a tool, marketing tool, and as a concept inside retailers today. So our agenda, just briefly, is we're going to talk about the future that looks bright for own brand. We're going to talk about the shopper shift to what matters, and it's like sort of a more meaningful way to consume things. Focus on value for money, and then we'll talk about own brands and how they're starting to evolve the way they engage with consumers. And then finally, we're going to talk about some changing landscapes, and it means that there are probably new kinds of relationships and new kinds of capabilities that the retailers will need to be fostering. So, the brightness of own brand's future. This is based on some work that comes from McKinsey. One projection is that it could be as much as $40 billion in terms of what the future of own brand could look like. I think part of the big appeal here is that, you know, it's bright for retailers because it means that they can start to foster more loyalty. They can sort of build things that are unique offerings or exclusive offerings. It's things that support their image. They're things that provide, importantly, value for their shoppers. I think for shoppers, the big part of this is that, again, it gives them not only value for the purchase in the same way that it used to, which was, you know, it was a lower cost alternative to some of the other products out there. But now I think it's increasingly starting to move towards having more added value. So it's something whose time has come as we see recession fatigue play out. And I think as we'll go through this, we'll see a little bit later inside it. We believe that there's probably an opportunity for the manufacturers as well, if you are, or national brands as well. So one of the things we want to think about here is for this to come true is it has to drive consumer acceptance, which has been one of the things that there's been some skepticism about this in the past, but I think, you know, it was sort of forced initially by the recession as a way to go forward. So meaningful consumption. One of the things we've seen that has come up as a result of the recession is that it's more than just an economic crisis. The recent, you know, economic recession, if you will, really signaled a complete change in economic, emotional, social, and cultural reset among consumers. So completely reevaluating the way they do things. So on the one hand, one could argue that the recession has served as the marketer's best friend because it's reset a lot of things and it's forced people and made them more acceptable to different kinds of thinking, new ways of thinking about things. And they've really done a lot to reevaluate how they shop and consume. And you can look at most of the studies that have been done, a host of these done by IRI and Nielsen, where they've already shown that consumers have really adapted to these conditions already. So they're eating out less, they're cooking at home more, they're buying fewer extras, they're postponing purchases, they're using coupons and sales, etc. So they are indeed, you know, taking advantage, and they've already developed strategies for coping, if you will, with the recession. But what we're starting to see increasingly here, and the picture that you'll see on the screen there is meant to be the dancing brain, and the dancing brain sort of moves between the right and the left side of the brain, between the rational and the emotional. But constantly we're seeing consumers do now is they're sort of moving between expectations and motivation. So just simply expectations are external things that are playing a role, and they do motivate people. When we're talking about motivations, though, we're saying those are more intrinsic or internal, and they generally have a little bit more power, if you will, in terms of getting people to do things. So what we keep seeing is the battle between those two forces, if you will, in terms of how shoppers are going about evaluating things, how shoppers are sort of behaving, and how they're thinking about their purchases and evaluating different products, if you will. So just a quick way to look at this is when you looked at some work that was from Big Insights, a Big Insight survey of 2012, they're now called Prosper, is what we've seen is we've sort of seen a shift from what's necessary to what matters, okay? And so one of the ways you saw this is when we talked to a lot of shoppers, still many of whom were women, they would tell us that they didn't want any more things on their to-do list, but rather they wanted to do things that they wanted to do as opposed to they felt they had to do. So that's one of the key shifts we've seen inside here. And what's happened then as a result of these external expectations or constraints that have come on is like in terms of what's necessary, they've had to do a lot of things to cut back. So they cut back on their travel and vacation time. They're eating out less. They're spending less money on groceries. They're only going for the essentials, if you will. They're driving less. Okay, so there are lots of things that are sort of being already incorporated into how to expand your household's budget. But what we've seen is that increasingly there's a desire for what matters. And so when we talk to some shoppers, especially for some of our key retail clients, we've seen is that they crave social entertainment. They're looking for emotional refreshment, which becomes important. And so, while they're doing all these things to control things, if you will, in terms of pricing and stretching their dollars, at the same time, they're still interested in socializing with friends and neighbors. And they're still interested in lots of family activities and cooking and celebrating holidays together and cookouts and barbecues. So what we've started to see here is that, are there things that we can, you start to see the clue here, if you will, are there things that the retailers can be doing that can help, right, or the brands can do to sort of bring these two things together. So one of the key trends that we've seen, it plays a huge role, is what I'll call recession fatigue. And again, shoppers have already had it. So the metaphor I've used, it seems to work pretty well, is if my wife were on a diet, she probably wouldn't appreciate it if I constantly reminded her about her being on a diet. So generally what we're seeing is that the same thing is going on. Shoppers are generally kind of tired of having to be reminded about the recession. They've already done that. They're tired of that. And so they're trying to move from survival to thrival, if you will. And so they're moving their focus from what they need to do, which is kind of an external thing, to what they, want to do, what matters to them. And so when we've looked at things even like how people are making choices around nutritional foods, right? One of the things we've seen is that even though that's one of the key trends in terms of what people say they have to eat healthier, we've seen that there are probably 3 other key factors that play a huge role in determining what people will do with nutritional food. So price, convenience, taste also play a role. And again, as you say, if it's really expensive, if it's something my family's not going to like the taste of, or I'm not going to like the taste of, or it's too complicated to make, it doesn't matter about, to some degree, its nutritional power. It's not going to drive there. So what we're seeing is that there are many kinds of things that are helping determine what people are looking at. So price is one of them, but it's not the only thing by any stretch of the imagination. So again, as we've seen this changing expectations in terms of balance, it used to be that the to-do list, the ways to save money, the cheapest way in, how can I balance my budget, were really the key things. And some of the other things, like what I want to do, would take a little bit of a back seat. But increasingly now we're starting to see that people are saying, I don't need to do all these things. Can I simplify my life a little bit? Can I purchase fewer things? And can I do that when the things I am going to purchase, I want to make sure that those are more discerning, planful, discriminating purchases that allow me to do what I want to do, if you will. So one of the examples we took a look at inside here that probably gives you some insight into this is when we looked at people sort of telling us about one of the key behaviors they do to save money is how much more they're cooking at home. Right, and you can see this makes sense, right? You see but the shift has been from the necessity to what matters. So we saw that, yeah, this is a way to cut back on my expenditure. It's a lot cheaper than eating out. Also, I know that it's kind of healthier if it's not good for me to eat out all the time. But when we started to look at then what matters, people are starting to say, yeah, it is healthier and it is cheaper and all that kind of stuff. But we're starting to see a whole series of other things come up, like the fact that there's surprise and adventure involved in it, or it's a possibility for family bonding to come around some kind of new meal, if you will, or new eating experience, or probably even more importantly is that it's about the creating and preservation of family traditions. And so what we're starting to see is something that started off as a necessity, eating at home to make ends meet, has now turned into something that now matters. And so that's what we're seeing as kind of a general trend inside of a lot of different things that are going on that are affecting the retailers. The other thing that's kind of related to this closely is what I'll call the democratization of values. The focus is not just on lowest price for economy and standard lines, but what we're seeing is that increasingly retailers are providing added value for the money across the board. So it's not just about price, and that they've started to move towards helping shoppers achieve more of what matters. So an interesting and fundamental shift in terms of what they're looking at. So just a quick overview of some brands that are sort of doing some of this. You can see these are brands we talked about as value with value. So it's sort of hitting both the economic as well as the emotional side of the spectrum for shoppers. And so you can think about things like Tesco's naturally powered laundry liquid, or the Algae line from Walgreens, which really does a great job. It's a fairly green line, if you will, affordable as you would expect. If you look at things like HEB, where they've done some interesting, innovative things with snack foods, okay, and Marks and Spencer in the UK has sort of given people access to more international flavors. And then Casino did a great job with basically what's their Nutella substitute, where this is now an own label that doesn't have palm oil in it. So again, it's got some value in it in addition to the price point. Another example of this is Tesco Everyday Value. One of the things that they did is that Tesco Everyday Value, they shifted, so they changed their name. I think it was just called Tesco Value to Tesco Everyday Value. And one of the things that occurred inside the shift is sort of a slightly different view of the brand. So their Everyday range offers you quality and variety and consistently low prices. But you can see that one of the things that's really key is here sort of at the bottom left-hand part there, where they talk about the fact that this is real food, and this real food contains no MSG, no hydrogenated fats, artificial flavors, colors, or GMO ingredients. So again, it's in a sense, it's sort of providing a little bit more value than it did in the past. And a couple of examples you can see down on the right there are their breaded chicken burgers and their strawberry cheesecake. I can vouch for the strawberry cheesecake. Probably not as good for you, but again, they're doing a really good job of sort of moving it towards more everyday foods, but also things that are more real food, if you will. So trying to make it a little bit better. Similarly, you've seen a couple other folks like Marks and Spencer, Delhaize, and you've seen the simple and essential stuff. And so what we've seen that comes out of here is like, Marks and Spencer does great new lines, which again, it gives people more choice. And whether you're doing this for everyday shopping or you're doing it for some special occasion. So really nice job of spanning the sort of range from, you can see the ready-to-eat sandwiches there from their deli to ground beef or some canned products. Similarly, Delhaize has done some really nice job with their My Essentials, and the inside here, what they've done is they've created, here's one of the labels from their yogurt line, but what it does is starts to give you an idea of they're trying to do some of these same things where they're trying to give some additional value in the form of, it's free from trans fats, low sugar, sodium levels, and etc. And it's got the nutritional labeling on the front of the product. So again, we're seeing a move towards some of this. And then similarly, we've seen a couple other folks like Kohl's, Kroger, and Sainsbury, where Kohl's has done a Simply Less line, which they have 90 products sort of from breakfast to desserts that are healthier eating, so it's a way to sort of get that into one's life. And Kroger's Simple Truth and Simple Truth Organic, fewer additives with organic ingredients. So again, this has done a very good job of starting to address a lot of needs of some of their shopper segments. And then finally, Sainsbury they had a line that's targeted to families, kind of an interesting thing. So it's sort of hitting both the convenience and the family aspect of it. So a nice combination, a unique combination. So, we've seen a couple of these brands, then some of the retailers that have started to move towards some of these brands that are, adding value to them. So one of the things we want to think about for just a few seconds is how the brands and retailers are taking new approaches to engagement. Okay, so one of my favorite ones recently I've seen is from Walgreens, where they've developed Happy and Healthy, Your Guide to Living Well at Walgreens. Very consistent with their overall positioning in terms of what their position is on wellness and their approach. And they really have two things that they have: basically a private label blog, which is the thing on the right, and they've got a magazine that comes out a couple of times a year, which sort of features a lot of editorial, but also does a really good job of sort of allowing you to reach beyond the store, if you will, in terms of trying to acquire new users or access some new folks. An interesting but little different tack comes from Asda, who has a program that's called Chosen by You. And here what's happened is that, in a sense, that they brought shoppers into this from the get-go. So they're the ones who sort of help identify products that seem to have a lot of, a prospect when they're exposed to them. They can evaluate them. And importantly, what happened is they would be able to identify sort of the green space, if you will, or white space that they could go after in terms of their shoppers. But importantly, the second thing that kind of came out of this is, as a result of participating inside the process, shoppers have become much more likely to endorse the product. And so there's a lot of benefits that are coming out accruing to them in terms of what's happening with their recommendations. And again, that's like the first stage in somebody else's purchase, path to purchase in so many cases. So I've done a couple other things inside here, like some of the in-store signage. So they've done a pretty good job of engaging shoppers, so you can think sort of from the get-go and all the way through to the time they go to the shelf to make a purchase. Carefour's consumer panel, interesting. They introduced this in 2011, and again, same thing where they've got something like 15,000 households across Europe. They've tested probably something like 5,000 different products here, and again, same thing where it has the interface between consumers participating in sort of, I guess you could call it the product development process in a sense, or being incorporated into it, but also it gives it the chance of, for them, those shoppers, to sort of provide product recommendations. Again, a very important part of how this is working. And then Migros, one of my favorites, they have constructed Migropedia, right, which is a website that helps optimize the product ranges. And really, this is like a gigantic test lab for them. And so then also it allows shoppers to express opinions on products and rate them and, have their say in devising them. So this is one of those that's really good, and it's done a really good job of amplifying the brand. So what we've seen here is that, again, they're starting to deploy some different approaches. And again, you'll probably recognized in the past, right? One of the things that sort of the private label or own brand suffered from was the retailer was not going to, allow a lot of resources or have a lot of resources for them to sort of leverage when they were marketing their product. So this is a really good way for them to amplify it as you go forward. And then finally, we've seen a couple other things that are going on with some of these where new ways to engage shoppers. So you've seen some of this with smartphones. It's worked pretty well. It's started to create a new level of transparency. So here you can see this goes with the Tesco's everyday value notion, where they talk about real food here and how you can put things together to come up with something that's going to fit your pocketbook, but at the same time come up with some kind of branding. And you can see some kind of solution. What you see at the bottom there, you can see that this from Aldi, where what they started to do is they included traceability of their products, especially things like meat and that, which is a great way for people to understand and get a little bit more transparency and perhaps communicate a little bit more about their retailer as a whole. So, fourth of our 5 things here, as we talk about, then own brand really represents a new approach. So if you think about historically, private label reflected the philosophy and really the sort of nature of its inventors, who were discount retailers. So it was a low-cost option. It was commodity-style presentation, minimalist packaging. What we're seeing increasingly, though, is that new approaches are really designed to drive traffic, expand penetration to new users, increase loyalty, provide unique experiences, and support the retailer image. And so, they're doing a few more things than when they were just this minimalist approach. As increasingly also, this is benefit-based approaches that focus on specific shopper needs. And there are a lot of them out there that shoppers are willing to, sort of give their purchase to if it, meets something that they are really interested in. So I've seen things like organic, healthy eating, environmentally conscious, low calorie, free from, clean labeling. And one of the interesting examples is by far probably what's going on in gluten-free market is probably a good portion of this is being met by retailers today. So it's an interesting challenge to start to go through it, but there are lots of benefits that could be sort of generated and addressed, if you will, against particular segments inside here. So we think this is a big area of opportunity. Second thing I wanted to talk about is a slight shift here. Is that this initially, when you think about where added value came from in terms of store brands, if you will, it was usually thought of as a place that would generate higher prices, right? So you can think about when you do this, you thought about how you move it to the premium brand, whether that was a manufacturer or inside the store brand. One of the things we're increasingly seeing, though, is that value for the money or added value is becoming the greens fees. And we've seen, in all the examples we've shown you, those are coming not only in their premium lines, but actually a lot of that work's being done in their economy line or their middle lines, value lines, in terms of where people are investing, where the retailers are investing in terms of this added value. So we think that the promise of own brands is really great. It's well suited if we think this to sort of fit with the shoppers, striving for more meaningful consumption. But I think it's going to be one of those that internal vigilance will be the thing that will help make sure that works. The other thing that we want to mention here is that the own brands have started to venture a little bit into uncharted waters, right? So if you think about if they create these really unique products, right, there are increased costs associated in terms of product development and increased chance of failure rates, right, which you didn't have in some of the other cases. And if you think about the fixed costs of this, regardless of the volume, since they're limited to trying to amortize this over their own stores, that's going to be one of the challenges in terms of how they can amortize it. So, sort of a little bit of crux of the issue there is like, the more unique the product, the more risk you have to absorb, but probably the greater the chance of success. The less unique the product, the less financially risky it is, but it's probably also the less commercially successful it's likely to be. And so the second part of that sort of relates to that is like if you think about the size of the manufacturers who can work with when you're trying to do some of this private label, that starts to play a role, right? So you think about it's only for one, then it's hard to amortize it across a number of retailers that are working, say, with a large manufacturer. So a little bit of a challenge there to find the right mixture of those things. Second thing is that we're seeing in terms of this landscape is that increasingly they need to develop new capabilities and new types of relationships, I think, are one way to think about it. And so you can break this probably into two different ways. One is internal. And so what we're seeing increasingly is that there's a need for own brand and marketing and category management and ops and all this kind of stuff to work together and sit together. And we've seen a lot of that stuff start to work pretty well. And so down in the lower right, you can see there's an example from one of the McKinsey studies where they've looked at a number of retailers who have sort of made sure that some of these guys are located in the same place. And that helps a lot with all these different capabilities that they're going to need to develop on the upper right-hand side. Second thing we've talked about inside here is our external collaboration, right? And so this is really becoming a key one where we're saying, this is important to collaborate with shoppers, with your own brand manufacturers, so the people who actually produce your brand, as well as the other brand manufacturers, whether that's national brand or something else, right? And because what we're starting to see is that the category, if you will, is kind of an ecosystem, and so to not leverage that kind of collaboration with the manufacturers, with the national brands, is a really foregone opportunity. So I want to make sure that we're aware of that and capturing that and trying to work together, if you will, in terms of how it can drive a category or particular private label product. And then product development and marketing, those are two of the other things that have been historically a little bit more of a challenge in terms of how retailers have gone to market. And so they're probably increasingly looking to new open systems approaches to how to develop products, like somebody like a P&G uses. But also the marketing, I think we showed some of the examples of how some different approaches to marketing being used by these groups. So we're seeing those new skills are really becoming important. In terms of success of own brand, again, what we think is that there's going to be a couple of things that will be important for this future to remain bright, right? So, they need to continue to build shopper acceptance by helping them achieve what matters. We know that retailers, democratization of value holds appeal for shoppers, but it creates challenges also because if you think about the retailer, how are they going to manage their tiered pricing approach to different things. And so if you think about a category, that's a little bit more of a challenge. Also, innovative own brand engagement by retailers, they ensure quality, relevance, and foster endorsement. So what we're saying is that if you think about a development process, it probably needs to have something that's more along the lines of the things we saw that Tesco was talking about, or Asda, or Carefour. So really important to do those kinds of things. And finally, we think that it points to new, changing landscapes that require new capabilities and relationships. And so what we're going to say is that, there's a need for a lot of things, insights, product development, collaborative relationships with a whole slew of people. And so that's all new territory. I think that's one where there could be foster a lot of interesting conversations between manufacturer brands and the retailer brands. So a little bit of an overview of what building brands is about today. I think I've run a little bit over, apologize, but I'll take any questions right now if we have any. So one question that's sort of popped up here is, what do we mean by more meaningful consumption? And I think this is a really interesting concept because we've seen it emerge in a couple different places. So I'll use a little bit of an example. So it used to be in the past that, if you were shopping for clothes, you might go and buy 5 different colors of jelly shoes because they're really inexpensive and they're on sale. And then at the end of the season, you'd go back to your closet and you'd see that, you'd only use 2 of those pairs. The other 3 were sitting there unused. And so what we've seen in consumers is that they are increasingly looking to use to purchase things that are going to be more meaningful to them, that are going to matter more to them. A second way you can see that start to emerge is, everybody's probably done some research on sustainable or green products and what kind of premium people are willing to pay for those. But what we started to witness is that consumers are saying this is almost the greens fees or the requirement that a manufacturer or a retailer needs if they're going to maintain my business. So in a sense, what we started to see is that more meaningful consumption means I'm going to do more with less, but I'm going to focus on the things that matter with me rather than some other things. Okay. So one of the things that another question that came out is why our own brands still need to learn from national brands, consistency in branding. So it's a really good question. One of the things inside here is I would say is they probably need to sync up a little bit more with marketing, but I think it would also be good to sync up with some of their national brand partners along the way. What we've seen, a couple examples like Walgreens, which was probably maybe one of the largest counterexamples, was doing some things specifically for its private label. Hard to get that consistency of branding, if you will, unless you sort of start to do some of these things separately. The consistency in branding, right, has meant that they've almost had to break down their portfolio into different sub-brands. So if you think about, let's use Walgreens as an example for a second, Ology is the one that's about sustainability and fewer harmful chemicals in terms of cleaning products. I think they've got Delhaize, they've got Nice. All these are brands that start to go against different kinds of needs. So the consistency of branding will probably have to occur more at almost like a sub-brand level inside those retailers. So I think that's one of the key things they could certainly start to learn from the manufacturers in terms of how they're bringing that consistency to life, if you will, and bringing it forward. Another question that came up is what category should manufacturers be scared of P&L? I think one of the private label, I suppose this refers to. Here's one way to think about that, I believe, if I've interpreted correctly. I apologize for private label. If you look at categories across there, you can sort of start to get an idea of what that landscape is like. And so if I look at things like paper products, they're going to have a high proportion of private label store brand inside there. Or if I look at things like frozen vegetables, or I look at things like, juices and all this kind of stuff. Okay, lots of dairy is a huge private label contingent or store brand contingent. On the other hand, there's some things that seem to be more immune to that, right? So you look at things like cosmetics and a lot of HABA products, or also if we look at some things like there's alcohol, there's things like carbonated soft drinks, all that kind of stuff, right? Where it seems as though the branding plays a huge role inside there. And so what we started to see is that there are probably some categories where that private label can play a larger role in terms of historically what they've been able to do is provide a price benefit there, if you will. There's a whole series of those things in paper goods that are like that as well. I think the challenge, though, is it's starting to open up, because what we're starting to see is that you can, if you go into almost any category and you start to create more value, if you will, for the money or added value, then that category can start to become redefined. And so probably the best example of that, where you're seeing a little bit of both existing and pretty coexisting in a lot of the is yogurt. That's probably one where you've probably seen the most introductions of any category, I think, globally. And almost every private label manufacturer every private label brand is trying to play a huge role inside there. So, I think there are some categories where there's probably not a ton of profit or growth inside them, unless they, you sort of do the game changer and start to update it. And then one of the other questions that came back is about, are consumers universally looking for more healthy foods? How does this play out against safety and price? I think that that's a fascinating question, because I think it's like every study we've looked at, it's like somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 the consumers say that they should eat healthier. That's a pretty far cry from looking for healthier foods, because again, as I mentioned, there are some other things that people have to consider when they go through there. But I think safety is probably an interesting one. It's probably a greens fee, because we've seen, you look at some markets, like say if you look away from the U.S. in places like China, this is the authenticity, if you will, the ability to do that is a really key part to make sure that you're getting safe foods. And I think safety also is playing a large role here in the U.S. now, but I think that's probably about greens fees and one's ability to do more with this kind of stuff when they go through there. Because I think, again, what's going to happen is like an example I showed in Aldi, where they gave you the transparency of being able to track where you're going. So, yes, I think people would like price. Who wouldn't? If you could have all those things and make sure that it was priced accordingly. I know there are some challenges we've had when we started to go through this in terms of being able to deliver on all those kinds of things. There's limits on, for example, the amount of arable organic land in the U.S. So I'm not sure you could totally do that. But again, it's an interesting way to sort of approach this stuff. And then one of the last questions I had is, could national brands be a thing of the past in 30 years, or will current owned brands be the national brands? Interesting question. I don't think that national brands will be a thing of the past if things sort of, some things go along as they currently have. And the main reason I would say that has to do is that the things that the national brands have usually been so strong at, not usually, have been really strong at, is delivering on innovation, delivering on relevance, and trying to update categories. And so they still are the leaders in most of that kind of thing in across almost every category I can imagine. And so I don't know that that's going to easily go away in the short term, or even in long term. I guess in 30 years, it's hard to picture that would happen. And again, another reason to think about that is if you think about the nature of the structure of retail, as we go to more online, solutions for some of these things, the question might be whether or not, the way we think about retail and retail brands will be the same. So I think that the national brands will probably still be around, even in the current model, but as we move to maybe a little bit more online, I think they'll probably play an even larger role. And then one of the questions is, what can national brands learn from own brands today? I think one of the key things they could learn is that, again, if we look at some of the leaders as we talked about them, a lot of them are in Europe, but again, Walgreens is doing some of the same stuff here as well, where you can look at a Tesco or an Asda. What they have done is they have actively brought their consumers into the development of their brand. So you can call it co-creation or innovative collaboration, whatever you want to call that phrase. But I think that is really a good way to bring it inside what you're sort of developing. And there are, again, P&G has done some of this stuff, and I'm sure there are a couple other folks who are doing the same thing. I think that's a really good thing that they could probably be learning from them. I think the second thing they could learn from own brands is how to do more with less. And so because so many of these own brands have had to be frugal with their marketing funds, let's say, or their ability to develop innovation and all that kind of stuff. They tended to be very discerning, very skeptical, very critical about how they approach these things. And so what they've done is they've done a pretty good job of sort of trying to focus with their resources. So I think that could be a really good lesson to learn, when you've seen it from someone who's really had to push the envelope and be really very clever, if you will, because of their resources. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you for your time today and your attention, and hope all is everyone was able to get something out of this. You can reach me at Jim Lucas at sgk.com, or if you want to follow on Twitter, Retail Ecologist. But we're happy to discuss any questions anybody might have. Thank you so much.